Good evening and welcome to the Monday, January 14, 2019 Board of Education meeting. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's go this way this time. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to ask the board's permission to add an agenda item, an executive session, item number 13, to discuss appointment of a new board member. Is there a motion to add an executive session item?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Item 3 on the agenda is to act on the minutes of December 10, 2018. Is there a motion relating to those minutes?
So moved. Second.
Okay, any corrections, changes, additions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Abstain.
Mr. Kazin abstains. Item number 4 is to administer oath of office to a new board member. Let me give you an update on where we are on that. We did interview on January 7th and January 10th 6 very qualified individuals. I think we're quite impressed with all of them, frankly. There were originally 11 people who submitted complete application packets for us, including resumes, cover letters. Some had references, some had some other materials. We are, for those of you who have been watching the board over the last couple of years, you'll know we are nothing if not deliberate, and we are going to continue to deliberate. And we are not going to vote tonight, although we have done all of the interviewing that we want to do, and I think we just need to do some more thinking about it, which is really a testament to how strong the candidates are, frankly. I think it's an exciting decision in many respects, but it's also a decision that we want to try to make sure we do the right thing and want to really not be hurried. And given that if we can make the appointment before the public meetings on the budget, then we will be able to get that person on board in time for the public budget hearing. So with that, there is no item 4 because we will not be administering the oath of office tonight to a new board member, but we hope to be able to do that before the next meeting, whether that it'll be done at that meeting or at a special meeting. So if that's okay with the board. All right. Item 5 is a public forum if the people have comments for topics that are on the board agenda. There is a place later in the budget or on the agenda that if as to any questions, that's item 12 on the agenda. But does anybody have any comment on any items on the board agenda? Okay. Mr. Kazin, you did the reviewing of the expenditures?
Yes, and we reviewed this thoroughly in the Operations Committee, so let me make a motion to approve the expenditures in the amount of $4,450,396.37 for December, together with the warrant of $1,813,206.75 and the associated financials that we reviewed.
Okay. There's a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Communications, anybody? I think we have 1 or 2 more communications about the request for more art instruction in the elementary schools. And I don't recall any others. No? Okay.
Prospective Board of Ed members.
Well, right, yeah, that's true. Okay. Well, failing that, why don't we turn it over to the student reps?
All right. So at Kelvin Leet School in kindergarten, the students are starting a literacy unit called Exploring Who We Are. And during this unit, each class will be reading and discussing 3 fiction texts about characters who are facing challenges of growing up. And the students will work to make connections to their own personal experiences. In 2nd grade, the students are exploring nonfiction text features, and they will use these skills to research a person who has made an impact on the world and write informational pieces to share what they have learned. And 4th graders are engaged in a digital literacy unit, where each student will choose a technology topic such as computers, car safety, airplane design, and video game animation, and research how the technology has changed and impacted our lives over time. The students will use Adobe Spark in order to create a digital presentation to share their work. And at Melissa Jones School, the grades 3 and 4 are going to have a concert, their winter concert, on Thursday, where they will sing and play ukuleles. And the Melissa Jones January PTO meeting was about mindfulness, where the parents learned about it and practiced it with a mindfulness specialist. Parents heard about how students practice brave breaths as part of the first lesson of the Choose Love program. And students in grade 4 are learning and writing about how technology has changed us, similar to at Calvin Leet. Grade 3 is forming and writing opinions on topics such as homework, television watching, and chocolate milk, to name a few. Second grade students are writing informational pieces as experts on topics of interest to them, such as gymnastics or baseball. And first graders are reading books and writing reviews about them. Finally, kindergartners are writing informational pieces on the topic Exploring Who We Are.
At Adams, students have been making weekly trips to Mount Southington to ski and snowboard through the Guilford Parks and Rec ski trip. On Friday after school, there will be an Iron Giraffe student volleyball tournament, and that's going to be followed by a student and staff volleyball game after school next Wednesday. Additionally, students in algebra and geometry have started to prepare for their midterms, which will be taken on January 25th. At Baldwin, there are a couple of upcoming music concerts. So the performances will be held for chorus on Wednesday, January 16th. The orchestra concert is scheduled for Thursday, January 24th, and the band concert is scheduled for Wednesday, January 30th. Students have been working on artist projects in art class and have been researching in the Library Media Center. In an interesting and creative twist, students were asked to choose 2 artists, then research their work and create a piece of art that represented a mashup of the 2 artists' styles. Students presented their work in a gallery walk setting and explained the influence of each artist on their pieces. Finally, Baldwin Middle School has devoted portions of early release days to focus on community building, and their 3rd community day is scheduled for January 23rd. They're very excited that their newly established Community Builders Club, which is made up of 20 students, is bringing a strong student voice to their efforts.
So at A.W. Cox, students raised $158 for the Bring the Shed to Life program by selling hot chocolate and brownies at a bake sale. At both A.W. Cox and Guilford Lakes, GHS Voices performed a variety of holiday songs right before the Christmas break, and the 4th graders were visited by Officer Shove, who talked about the role of the law in the community and how it is important to listen to the good voice in your head when you're making decisions. Also, the 4th grade school store group opened the school store for the 2nd week in a row and will be open weekly on Fridays.
All right, and news at the high school. So, as with Adams, here midterms are coming up soon, and in response to this, there will be care packages for midterms available for high school students, and they are sold by the Women in Science Club in order to alleviate stress. And the Sandy Hook Say Something anonymous reporting system will be unveiled shortly for all high school, Adams to high school students. And all students will be trained Wednesday to use an app that goes on their phones that allows them to report anonymously anything that could hurt themselves or others, which could be verbal, physical, or digital means. And this is because there are millions of youths that hurt themselves or others, which can lead to emotional and physical trauma.
So our spring musical has officially started. We auditioned 81 people over the past couple weeks, and we ended up with a cast of 36 people. The musical for this year is called Anything Goes. It's an exciting story about a cruise en route from New York City to London, England. It's set in the 20s with lots of fun music and dancing. In other news, the Science Olympiad team is getting ready to compete at the Yale Invitational on January 26th, and they will be competing in 22 different events with 15 people. The competition season started in October when Ellie and Clara Weisler brought the program to GHS, and teachers Mrs. Chiappa and Mrs. Meridian of the biology departments signed on to be the advisors. They are currently running on a grant from the Guilford Foundation of $1,300.
Winter sports have started. Boys basketball has 4 wins this season, and their next game is on Wednesday at Wilbur Cross. Girls basketball also has 4 wins, and their next game is at home against Hand on Friday. Fencing has had another incredible season. They're undefeated so far, and they have a meet on Friday at Cheshire. Boys ice hockey are 7-2 and have picked up big wins over West Haven and North Brantford. Also, one of the students in the ABC program at the high school has recently been accepted into a summer law program at Stanford University. She'll be participating in a 10-week program at the law school, holding mock trials and exploring the field of law. We'd like to thank the Song Foundation for their donation of $1,000 to Unified Sports at the basketball game last week. And finally, Mia has made her decision for college. She will be attending Washington University in St. Louis and will be pursuing a degree in history and marketing.
Congratulations.
That's it.
That's that.
Terrific. All right. Well, thank you. You know, I know that the Sandy Hook Promise group, I think, presented right before.
That's correct.
Can you just, what happened? What was done?
So last week for a group of middle school parents, and then again tonight for a group of high school and middle school parents. At this time, Sandy Hook Promise has been through the stages of training our local police department, training those of us in the administrative and mental health teams who will be receiving any calls that come in, sharing the information with the full faculties at both Adams and the high school, and then in those 2 parent meetings, sharing the information with the parent community. This week, they will be in our schools training the students at both Adams and the high school. The student training involves reminding students not to be bystanders, but that if you are aware of something, if you are concerned about someone, that you need to say something. After talking about the importance of sharing that information, they will then introduce the Sandy Hook Say Something app or system, which includes an app for a smartphone as well as a traditional telephone number and a website. And then any member of our school community in either Adams or Guilford, if they have a concern about somebody who's going to make an unsafe decision, harm themselves, or be harmful to others, if they've been mistreated, can anonymously get that information, and it goes both to the school system and the Guilford Police if appropriate. And we've done this in partnership with the Guilford Police Department and the Sandy Hook Promise Foundation, and we're very excited to be bringing it to the community. Lots of credit goes to the Song family who brought this to our attention and really pushed to have this happen in our community. So that system will be live in our schools next week.
Great.
It's just one more way for students to make sure that they have a way to get help or they have a way to get somebody else help when needed.
And students are on top of this, or?
Yes, they'll be downloading the app at an advisory meeting on Wednesday.
Great.
We're live this week.
Great. Terrific. All right. Well, thank you. Any questions for student reps? All right. And then, are you going to still be doing homework now, or giving up on
Stay for my
homework?
budget presentation.
You could stay for Dr. Freeman's budget presentation.
You know what? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, speaking of budget presentation, Dr. Freeman, and let me, can I just preface this by one quick thing? I know I think we say this every year. This is Dr. Freeman is going to present Dr. Freeman's proposal to the Board of Education. I don't think that there has been a time since Dr. Freeman has been here, and it's nothing personal, but there has never been a time where the budget that we ultimately adopted was the budget that Dr. Freeman presented to us. Now, it's usually pretty close, but there have been some years that there have been some pretty significant differences, and some years less significant differences. So this is very much the first step in a process, and he's not going to take it personally if we change something, and so we are here to listen to your proposal tonight. We will not be voting on anything tonight. I think we have 2 days of public hearings, or 2 evenings of public hearings in late January,
28th and 29th.
28th and 29th at Adams at 7:30. And then we will thereafter be voting on what budget we move forward to the Board of Finance, which, oh, by the way, also has the ability to change our budget and often does. So this is very much a work in progress. So I just want to remind everybody that this is something that there will undoubtedly be some changes to. So with that,
Thank you.
sure.
So thank you, Mr. Bloss. This is the one presentation a year that I make to the Board of Education from the podium, and the leadership team, the administrative team, the business team, and I are very proud of the draft that we present to you tonight. We recognize that this is very much the first step in a community-wide process to develop our ultimate school budget moving forward. But I am happy to share the work with you that we have brought so far. In this presentation, I will make a point of hitting the high lines of the cost that we anticipate in this draft. I intend to highlight cost drivers, efficiencies, and investments that we have built into this budget. And as I did last year, I intend to highlight areas where I think there is significant room and need for this Board of Education to talk about whether or not this draft needs to have more added to it or reductions, rescissions made from it. And I will attempt to highlight just some of those areas as we, the leadership team, present this to you, and then go from preparing this for you to now partnering with you as you move the work forward. As we do every year, I just want to start by reminding the board and the community that a budget is a values document. The budget springs from the work that we have done in the school system, and it moves forward from the values that we embrace. It does not fall out of whole cloth. Every year, as we begin working on our budget, we remind ourselves why we are here. We start first by looking at what has become a fairly significant historical document for us. We look at the vision that we set for our schools some 10 years ago now. We look at the mission that we have carved out for our schools. Our vision is of a professional learning community where instruction invites effort on the part of the student learners and supports academic rigor for all students and educators in our system. Our mission is to foster excellence in a respectful and challenging academic environment that leads to a lifelong passion for learning and the realization of each individual's highest potential for success in life. While we begin with that historical frame, every year we look at the year in which we're currently sitting as well. And so I do want to remind the community that this year's work began with a set of priorities that this board adopted in August of this year to focus this school year. And those priorities, while they are essentially the same as they have been for the last 6 or 8 years, sit on their heads this year. In the past, this list of priorities began with all students will engage in academically rigorous tasks. This year, while we embraced the same priorities, we knew it was important to begin by saying our schools will be physically and emotionally safe, healthy, and caring places for learning to occur, built upon supportive relationships and positive decision-making. From the focus on the environment, we then looked at what teaching and learning needs to look like in our schools. That teaching and learning needs to be supported by instructionally focused leadership, subject area coaches and specialists, professional learning communities, and appropriate instructional resources at all levels. And only after we've thought about the overall environment and the professional environment can we really then focus on our classroom environment, which is what we're here for. All students will engage in academically rigorous tasks in every class. Instruction will be aligned to appropriate content area standards, integrated with the principles of learning, and measured by the ongoing collection of evidence of learning and observations of instruction. From those priorities, we identified 6 specific initiatives that we work on this year. And again, I want to draw you particularly to the first one, that our first initiative this year, what we know we need to focus on to strengthen the schools that we have in Guilford, is to promote classroom environments, task designs, and instructional strategies that foster social and emotional health and wellness. And from there, we focus on the learning goals that we have laid out for us. That first bullet identifies 3 really important components: the environment in the classrooms, the things we ask the students to do in those classrooms, and the ways in which we teach to support those activities in those classroom environments. And while we have prided ourselves on the academic rigor that goes along with those, we know that we need to pay at least as much attention to the social and emotional learning that comes from those experiences. We have always been aware of this, but this year we want to call it out and shine a light on it. And those priorities and these initiatives have shaped our work this year, and therefore they have shaped the budget request that we bring forward to you that will shape next year's work as well. And then zeroing in from the very high-scale vision and mission to this year's priorities and initiatives, as we begin the budget work, we always lay out our budget assumptions. And those assumptions are that first, we focus on the environment. Second, we never lose our focus on instruction and learning. And this year, that means 4 important sub-bullets. It means that we are always striving to be better than we were in the past year. We are never comfortable resting on our laurels. We always intend for next year to be better and more for our students than it was this year. And we expect to be creative with the resources that we have available from this community. We do not come forward asking for more until we have first looked at how we can use what is currently in the budget. We take great pride in how we have maximized scheduling, how we have looked to use personnel resources, how we have reshaped offices and instructional programs to always try to be creative before asking for more resource that's put into the budget. And then finally, the last piece that we look at before we talk about a single dollar is we need to look at enrollment projections. We only budget for the students that we expect to be in the classrooms next year. And so here you have a several-year look back and a projection for next year. We are projecting an increase at the high school as we see a population bubble that is moving out of Adams and into the high school freshman class next year. But we see an overall slight decrease across the district of approximately 60 students as we project into next year's numbers. I want to remind the board that some years ago we contracted a demographic study and then we had that study renewed. The study results are what you see in the red line projected there. Our actual enrollment is what you see in the green line. While other similar communities around the state have seen that decline that you see projected in the red line, Guilford began stabilizing in 2014-15, and we've started to see a slow decline in the last year or two, but at this point we project to be approximately 350 students above the mark that the demographic study had called out for us. We are no longer projecting the incoming class based on that demographic study, but in fact on this year's kindergarten class, and that has been a much more accurate predictor for us over the last 2 to 3 to 4 years. We are considering the idea of going out, and even though this demographic study pushes us out to 2024, because of this discrepancy, we think we may need to look at getting some more information and looking at what may be out there for us. So with all of that going into the mix, looking first at our vision and mission, then down to the projected enrollments for next year, I want to go straight to the bottom line and share with you that this year, the leadership administrative team's budget draft predicts or calls for, requests, a $60,963,831 budget going into next year. That would be an increase over this current year's budget of $1,466,656, or a 2.47% increase. I do want to note for the Board of Education, this is the single lowest increase that I have brought to you as part of the administrative budget request. At no time have I given you an initial document with a request that is this low. To put that in some historical context, you'll note that from 16-17 onward, we have been approving very, very conservative budgets in the community. For the last several years, we have seen increases just above or just below 1%. This year at a 2.47% increase. Again, while it's the lowest that I have brought for you, this illustrates some of the work that both the Board of Education and Board of Finance have brought to bear on the budgets that the administrative team brings forward. And in 16-17, response to the public voting on our budgets. As I mentioned, I want to start by highlighting what we recognize as efficiencies in this budget. First, While salaries represents the single biggest expenditure in this budget, I continue to recognize salaries as one of our greatest areas of efficiency. Education is a people business. The most important dollars that we spend are dollars that are spent on the teachers, the nurses, the kitchen workers, the custodians, the clerical staff, and the administrators who work in the buildings with the children of this community every single day. Salaries are, simply said, the largest single portion of our budget. And we work very carefully to try to leverage every one of those positions to its greatest effect for the children and for the community. We will reshape positions, we will reschedule positions. I think special education over the last several years is the greatest example of how we move our people and resources to be where our students need them the most. We have expanded our special education supports, growing out programs in our youngest grades, and then we have had teachers who started with students when they were kindergartners and pre-kindergartners who have now leapfrogged all the way into Adams, because as the population travels, the needs of the students drives where we place those staff members. So while it's our single greatest expense, I take great pride in how hard we work to keep that expense down. Medical benefits, however, may show this year as our single greatest success. The medical spend this year will be below the 14 and 15 school year levels. The work that this board has done negotiating contracts with all of our bargaining units, shifting our employees to an HSA medical plan, allowing families with multiple coverages the opportunity to buy out of our plans. The work that this board has done negotiating those contracts in conjunction with some positive experience over the last couple of years has given us a medical reduction this year that helps to offset other costs. And then I need to give credit to the department heads and the building principals who work to keep the real costs in their buildings down every single year. We do not throw money around in our classrooms in our schools. We work very hard to keep those costs controlled. And just to give a little more information on a couple of these items, here's the history of medical spending in the district. From a high of $10.2 million, this year we will be budgeting $9.4 million for the medical benefits that our employees require in the school system. I'm incredibly appreciative of the efforts of the Board of Education in controlling those costs and allowing us to recognize a reduction in medical spending this year. And to focus a little bit on the work of the building principals and those department heads, I wanted to show the board the budget broken out by location. I will note athletics is the only item here that includes salaries, so that athletic line does include coaching salaries. In none of the other areas are salary costs included. But you can see that when we look at supplies, materials, equipment costs, we have worked hard to keep those costs down. Special education being the only location where you see a significant increase, and I will talk about that more when we get to cost drivers. And so after working on where we can control costs and mitigate costs, we do then have to talk about non-discretionary cost drivers. And this year, there are only two. In other years, I've put up as many as 4 or 5 non-discretionary cost centers that have driven this budget. This year's budget only has 2 significant cost centers. One is that salary increase that I spoke to, and there are 3 significant reasons for the salary increase that you see in front of you tonight. One is that we are entering the 3rd year of our teacher contract. It is not unusual for the 3rd or final year of a labor contract to be one of the most expensive years. As we negotiate with those groups, we often try to push cost off, and so much of any raise that was recognized fell into that 3rd year. Secondly, and equally importantly, we have seen a reduction in federal grants, a reduction of approximately $130,000. Almost more than 10% of that figure is a recognition that we have lost federal grant funding that last year helped to offset our salary costs. We didn't lose the grants completely, but the grants have been reduced, and we are absorbing over $100,000 into that line that last year we were able to offset with grants. And finally, and this goes back to the history of spending that I showed. Over the last several years, as we have worked to keep those budgets as conservative as possible, we have looked to hire very conservatively as well. In many subject areas, I have placed hiring caps or experience caps for the principals. As we have hired in less expensive teachers, less experienced teachers, each year we see more movement between the steps built within our salary scale and from degree advancement. So as we've hired less experienced, less expensive teachers, we've kept the overall cost down, but as those teachers enter our ranks and then every year gain steps or achieve a degree advancement, it makes this line more volatile, and therefore while we brought the cost down, you see more incremental growth year over year. So this is obviously our most significant cost driver. The second significant cost driver is tuition increases. When we place students in schools other than our Guilford public schools because of their individual needs, we pay tuitions for those placements. This year, the tuition increase is slightly over $600,000, and that is due to three specific reasons. One, and we've mentioned this every year, our students have changing needs. And so as students in our systems have emerging needs, or as students with needs move into Guilford and enter our schools, it is oftentimes impossible to predict those emergent needs, and they end up driving up the cost as more students recognize those needs. Additionally, we have seen reduction in state-level cost offsets around the excess cost formula, where in the past we had received dollars for expenditures for some of our most expensive students. The state has placed caps on those levels, and they have refused to approve expenditures that they have paid in the past. So while the state bears a responsibility for offsetting that cost, they are in many ways offsetting a lower portion of that cost this year. And then finally, with a change in administration in the special education office, we have changed some accounting practices and corrected some items. Those three items together represent that cost increase, that cost driver in tuition. These two items alone represent an increase of $1.6 million. And I want to remind you that when I showed you the bottom line, the total budget is only going up 1.4. We've worked in those other areas like medical, like the site line, the location lines, to offset this increase as much as possible. And to show you a little bit of detail around what I meant with special education, there's a lot going on this visual, so let me try to unpack that a little bit for you. The blue line that you see running and waving along the bottom of the chart are our budgeted expenditures for special education. And you see how difficult it is to budget. It's a small number of students who may have significant needs, and because it's such a small N, those needs fluctuate. The red line that you see above that, that's the actual spend in special education. And so in addition to seeing how it is a volatile line, you can also see how difficult it is to predict that line. The trend lines that we added there are to show you that over time, when we have missed on those special education numbers, that miss is getting larger. And that bears a weight on the rest of the budget. When we come in under budget on any one line, the other lines within the budget need to offset that overage. And so as we've brought in more and more frugal budgets over the last several years, as we have tried to really be careful in how we budget for the special education spending, I am concerned that we may not be budgeting enough of a contingency as those misses are getting larger over time. I'm not sure how much longer we're going to be able to show this line, but I know Mr. Hoey will ask for it, and so I am projecting this one. Before we began building our local capacity to keep more of our students home in the schools around the 11-12, 12-13 school year, we were on an incline that looked different than this one. If we had not changed our practice and if we continued to outplace students at the rates at which we had, I do believe that we would be spending, and I'm not sure that we'd be spending $7.6 million, but I'm convinced that if it weren't for the capacity that we built to keep more of our students at home, we have cut our outplacement numbers by roughly half over these last 5 or 6 years. We keep more of our students home. I believe we do them a better service by keeping them in our local schools, and I do believe that we have avoided additional spending by doing so, even though this continues to be our most volatile cost center. So we've talked about the efficiencies. We've talked about what's driving the expenses for this year's budget. And then every year we do make decisions. And every year that I have stood in front of you and asked for a budget to move forward, I have told you that I'm not bringing forward a status quo budget. I don't believe that I was invited to join the Guilford Public Schools to keep things as they are, but we believe in continuous improvement. So every year that we've brought a budget forward to you, we have intended to improve our base performance over last year and to expand services year over year. This year, we're getting close to only being able to say that we intend to rigorously improve performance year over year. There are very few expanded services in this budget that we present to you tonight. What we are focusing on is we're focusing on a continued investment in small class sizes, quality instruction supported by instructional leadership, the new IB program that we've rolled out at the high school, as well as the continuing AP program at the high school, and a continuation to provide the special education capacity to keep our students at home. In addition to that, we are looking at some opportunities at the high school to extend student voice, ways to empower the students in the community to identify for us what they see as most important, what they want their community to be responding to, and for them to drive the work that we do in our community. And finally, an increased investment this year in professional learning. So to unpack each of those a little bit. This year, we're looking at increasing our professional learning line, the PD line, as it's identified in your budget book, by approximately $25,000, well, by $25,000. The intent of those dollars would be to focus on two important needs moving forward. One is the transition happening in the Office of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment. As Dr. Keene moves on and takes 20 years of experience and history with her, and someone new moves into that office, I want to make sure that that office has the support that it needs and the resources it needs so that we're not taxing that transition. I want to make sure that there is instructional, curricular, and assessment support available so that we transition successfully and do not lose a beat in that office. But also, and in your meeting with the leadership team, we know that there is a need to support the professionals in the school system who are most responsible for the social and emotional well-being of our students. We have school counselors, school psychologists, and school social workers who are there to support the work that the teachers are doing in the classrooms and to support our students as they come into our schools every year. And while we know that we have appropriate staffing levels, we need to be supporting those people so that they can be more effective, more proactive, and not be so reactive and responsive to issues that come up. So a significant portion of those dollars will be set aside to identify the supports that are needed and provide the supports to those professionals. In the area of student voice, I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about an idea that we're looking to present at the high school, which we're calling the Congress of Clubs. The idea is to grow student leadership and to grow student voice here at the high school by bringing together a large representative body of students who are already engaged in other organizations. It doesn't replicate the student government, but it focuses on important topics in our community. I have been working with Mr. Macenti, some teachers in the high school, and specifically with the Commission for Women, Children, and Seniors out of Hartford on this idea. The idea being it would be a true representative body that spends a portion of the school year every year learning about leadership and specifically civic leadership, spends a portion of every school year talking about what the students feel are the most pressing and important topics to them in their community and in their schools, and then spends a portion of every year doing something around that topic, either educating themselves or educating this community. So rather than the adults saying to the students, social media is important, or dress code is important, or this is important, that we actually go to the students and ask them what they feel is important and give them the tools and the space and the support they need to be able to make a difference around those topics themselves. So the dollars that you see allocated there would go towards teacher supervisors who would support that work, some small dollars for travel if the students wanted to participate in leadership opportunities in Hartford or at other schools, and some small dollars set aside for materials that they might need to be able to achieve that work. And we're excited about doing that work. And Mr. Steve Hernandez, who is the commissioner of that Commission of Women, Children, and Seniors, is waiting to come and talk with all of you more about that later in the year if it's something that we choose to move forward. I want to point out that those investments this year total $35,000. In past years, I've stood in front of you and asked for an investment to launch international baccalaureate programming at a much larger, much higher dollar figure. Past years, we've stood here and talked about launching full-day kindergarten with a cost that came close to $600,000. These are very conservative investments when we talk about the dollars, but we believe that they're significant investments as we continue to focus on that base work that we are doing here in the school system. From a staffing summary, what it means is that our staffing stays very, very flat this year. We are projecting a reduction in the administrative line, not in FTEs, not in full-time equivalents, but in time. We had changed one of the positions in the special education office from a 10 to a 12-month position. This year, we believe that we can reduce that. We don't believe that we need those 2 additional months in the special education office moving forward. While we have a slight reduction in district-wide PE staffing that we believe we can absorb in the building level staffing, we will not require a traveling position any further. We've got a slight increase in math and a very minor reduction in paraeducational staffing and no custodial request. For the second year in a row, we have no request for increased staffing in custodial or maintenance. So what we're looking at is essentially flat staffing or a very minor increase across categories of slightly over 1 position. So as our enrollment remains essentially flat, as our investments are very modest this year, we're not looking at significant staffing increase. What that leaves, however, is I do believe it leaves area for significant conversation, deliberation, and decisions that this board needs to make. And while you obviously will take this budget and make it your own, I do want to take the liberty of drawing your attention to some of those areas. There has been significant comment from the community. In fact, the single largest request that we have heard across this school year is for an increase in art FTEs. Obviously, the budget that I've just put in front of you does not include an increase in art teachers. You still have the opportunity to do that. I do want to comment on that item. As the board has heard comment on art positions and art contact time at the elementary schools, and I believe in the petition that the board received, there has been reference to state mandates or recommendations for contact time. Specifically, I believe that we're talking about 2 touches per week, 2 classes per week for 60 to 100 minutes. I want to make clear that there are no state mandates or state regulations at this time that speak to contact time at all. The best that I can determine, those numbers were drawn from recommendations that the state took down in 2001. In 2001, the state did make recommendations for contact time in all of the different discrete subject areas. The state withdrew those in 2001 because it was pointed out to them that if you added up all of the recommended minutes in all of the discrete subject areas, you couldn't fit it into a 6.5-hour school day. At that time, the state removed any recommendation for specific contact time. The current recommendations in art are that all school districts will appropriately respond to the state-identified art standards, and those standards have been identified by grade level. I also want to draw your attention to an exhibit in your folder. You have a multicolor exhibit that identifies for you all of the DIRG A and B school districts. On that exhibit, we have pulled out, because the state doesn't do this reporting any longer, but we have pulled out the length of school day for all DIRG A and B school districts. We have pulled out the amount of recess, specific identified recess time, not free play overall, but specific to recess. And we have pulled out the amount of art contact time for you. Just to highlight, what I can tell you is that of all the DIRG A and B school districts in the state of Connecticut, we have the shortest elementary school day. There are other schools that are as short as ours at 6 hours and 25 minutes, but there are no other districts that are shorter than ours. There are some districts that have a school day that is as long as 6 hours and 50 minutes in those DIRG representations. When you look at recess contact time, we fall right about the average. I believe the average is 27 minutes a day, and we currently program for 25 minutes a day, grades 1 through 4. And when you look at art contact time, you'll notice that the most common art contact time is 40 minutes per week. Now, while the average is slightly higher, and while you'll see that some communities like Darien have higher contact time than we do, the most commonly scheduled art contact time is 40 minutes per week. Now, what I've also heard as we've talked about art over the course of this budget season is the importance of art in our classrooms and to our students. And I want to recognize and applaud the parents who have come out and talked about that. And while I do not believe that we are in either a budgetary or scheduling position to add more art pullout time, I absolutely believe that we need to listen to our community, and we need to ensure that we are addressing those art standards that have been identified by the state of Connecticut. We need to make sure that our art teachers are addressing those standards in the art classrooms that we provide. We need to ensure that our classroom teachers are embedding those standards into the work that they do in their classrooms. And in both cases, we need to make sure that we do it in a way that highlights creativity and fun and doesn't turn art into an academic experience. So while I appreciate what we have heard, and while I know that this board needs to wrestle with the requests that you have heard, I wanted you to have that information before we talk about that decision moving forward. There's also been significant conversation about transportation this year. This year we launched new bell schedules. We pushed our high school back 15 minutes in the morning. We pushed our middle schools back by 10 minutes in the morning, and we pushed our elementary schools back by 5 minutes in the morning. We did this in an attempt to get more sleep and a healthier start time for our oldest adolescents, and what we did is we compressed the opportunity to run our buses in an efficient way. We moved our first school back 15 minutes, and we only moved our last schools back 5 minutes, giving a new bus company less time to deliver the students in an effective way, and to get them to all of their schools on time, but not too much earlier than they need to be there. I've said in a couple public meetings that as we've looked at this work this year, it did not turn out as well as I had hoped, but it did not turn out as badly as I had feared. We have netted a gain for almost every single high school student of approximately 15 minutes of additional sleep time every morning. We've exacerbated the bus system, and we had one of the most challenging Septembers and Octobers with transportation that we've ever had. All of that being said, if we want to continue to improve the bus service further, I believe it will require a significant investment at this time. Adding one bus to the road won't do a lot to solve our problems or to bring more efficiency. If the board wants to look at the idea of investing further in transportation, I believe we need to start by talking about a minimum of 4 buses, one at each of the neighborhood elementary schools, and that's going to carry a cost of approximately $200,000. I can say that at this time, after a very rough opening and after a lot of hard work, almost every high school student is recognizing all of those 15 minutes in sleep savings. We had projected further savings from bus efficiencies, and we did not realize those. But also, every single elementary student this afternoon was home before 4:20. So we are able to match the times that we had for the closing of school last year. We have netted some additional sleep in the morning. It's not as much as we had hoped, and it wasn't achieved as easily and painlessly as we had planned, but I believe to go further will require discussion of a significant investment. Again, this year, we've been asked to set aside half the cost of turf replacement on our original turf field, and to do that would mean adding $300,000 to this budget. I wanted to draw your attention to it, but at this time, I cannot recommend that as an addition to this budget. We do have at least another year or two in the original turf field, and I can't move that recommendation forward at this time, but wanted to call it out to you. And then, we may want to discuss adding dollars to the tuition line. If we are concerned about those trends and about the misses in budgeting, we may want to talk about possible additions as we look at the tuition line in your deliberations moving forward. At the same time that there are open questions about growing this budget, there are obviously questions about reducing this budget. I want to call your attention to some areas for your consideration as you look at possibly reducing this budget. I want to start by noting that the $1 million increase in salaries does not include a retirement savings yet. Over the past several years, we have built in a supposed retirement savings. While I haven't settled on that number or built it into the draft, I will recommend that the board needs to settle on a number. We can talk to you about what we see as possible retirements coming up for this school year. I will remind you that not all retirements are made equal. Retirements in certain subject areas, certain certification areas, like English language arts or social studies or elementary certification areas, will likely generate a savings. But retirements in areas like math, science, or particularly world language, as shortage areas, will be less likely to generate any type of savings if we find openings in those areas. Non-certified pension. At this time, your budget includes an investment in the non-certified pension of $700,000. I believe the pension committee would be more comfortable with an investment of $800,000. We know that to maintain the level of liquidity that we currently have would require an investment of $500,000. I think that there may be room between $500,000 and $700,000 for the board to consider some reduction in the pension funding, particularly if we continue to follow past practice and look to June as an opportunity to make an additional payment should there be any surplus in our budget before we close our books. Facilities is another area. We dramatically reduced our site improvement line several years ago where we failed to pass our initial budget at a town referendum. We had worked diligently to build that line up so that we were ahead of maintenance concerns, and we were preventatively maintaining at our schools rather than responding to concerns in the schools. We reduced that line significantly a few years ago, and we have slowly been building back. This year's budget includes a $100,000 increase to the facility line. While I would very much like to maintain that increase, I could suggest a reduction to a smaller number. Any increase is movement in the right direction, and so there is a possibility of some reduction of between $0 and $100,000 in that line should the board want to look for other areas to make reductions. And then there's tuition. Budgeting for tuition is always going to be an estimate. We simply don't know if our students are going to have emergent needs or if new students are going to come to our town with needs. And so we could adjust that line up, we could adjust that line down, and in past years, we have always done well to meet the needs of all of our students and not go beyond our budget allocation. It's simply an area that I believe the board needs to discuss further moving forward. So, Mr. Bloss, you called this budget that I present tonight a draft. It is very much a draft, as there are some significant areas that we need to have further conversation before we can call this budget complete. Stepping away from the operational budget for just a moment, I do want to identify that we do have a proposed bonding request for the board this year as well. You will recall that we're currently working out of a 10-year calendar. We have projected out bonding requests some years ago to go 10 years out. We're 4 or 5 years into that calendar at this time. The work that we are planning on doing this summer, for which we would need to request bonding, would include the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems at Cox School, which are up for replacement. There are a series of windows at Melissa Jones that still require replacement, and then there are the architectural and engineering costs associated with the future years on that calendar that we will require. This makes a bonding request of essentially $3 million that we are proposing. We discussed that in some greater detail during the operations budget. We can certainly talk about that further. That would be a separate item on the referendum, separate and apart from the $60 million operating budget that we're talking about. What it means is this budget, at the bottom line, is a focus on the work that we have already successfully begun in the school system. We're continuing to focus on the academic excellence that we have provided. We're continuing to focus on the program improvements that we have already put in place. We're bringing special attention to the fact that our students need to be healthy and well and happy in the work that we ask them to do here in the schools. But there's nothing essentially really new to this program. There's no IB program, there's no full-day kindergarten. It is an investment in what we currently have. And again, I just want to point out, and I know that Mr. Bloss and I will add more detail to this when we present this budget to the Board of Finance, but I have to say again that by any measure, There is no more successful school system in the state of Connecticut. You can look at any measure you choose. You can look at outside objective evaluations. You can look at standardized test scores, the state accountability measures, college placements, the arts, the athletic programs, or the overall culture and climate of this school system, and I will put us up against any other school system for the quality that we provide to our community. We do that while maintaining a focus on instruction and remaining open to constructive feedback and always focusing on continual improvement. I think that we offer an unparalleled return to this community for the investment that we make. And with that, I'm happy to turn this budget draft over to the Board of Education for the next month's worth of work.
Right. Thank you. So tonight really is just a receive item for us. If we have questions, we can ask them, although I think Mr. Sands volunteered in the Operations Committee meeting to kind of be a clearinghouse for any questions to the administration and Ms. Trudeau and Mr. Bowden and Dr. Freeman, so that we have the general range of those answers covered. And I do want to just emphasize, by the way, that when you had turf fields in there, that's the old football field.
That is the old football,
Right.
the original turf field, correct.
Which is about 10 years old now, I think, or 8?
It's 10.
Is it? Okay. So that's an anticipated, that's something that we knew, everybody knows is going to happen someday, and the question is this year, next year, the year after that.
Right.
But this has nothing to do with the new field. I understand that's been at least tentatively resolved. No,
It has been resolved.
has been resolved, all
At
right?
no cost to this community.
No cost.
So we will lose some time, but that field will be corrected, replaced at no cost to this community.
Okay, great. Any questions or comments now? I mean, usually we defer too many comments until after we've heard from the public, but if there are thoughts,
And you mentioned them already, but the most important dates for the community are January 28th and 29th, Monday and Tuesday at Adams, where this budget is then open for the community to comment on to the board as this budget shifts from the administrative draft to the board budget.
okay. Well, I guess in the absence of any questions
all
or
very
comments now, we'll add more later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And do you have anything else, Dr. Freeman?
That concludes my report.
All right. Then under the board agenda, 10.1 is to receive a textbook recommendation, which is Pearson Chemistry, which is that rather large book in front of Dr. Keene, which looks heavy. And this is just received tonight. Does anybody want to comment on it, Dr. Keene?
Well,
or is there?
Scott McDowell is here. He's the chairperson of the science department, and also assistant principal Julia Chaff. And as you know, the board approved a new curriculum in science last summer. We've been rolling it out, and in the meantime, the science department have been examining resources, trying to replace some outdated ones to be more in line with the curriculum. So if you just want to give us a brief overview of the process and some of the reasons that you are recommending this text, I'll pass it around and you guys can weigh it.
Once we adopted the NJSS curriculum, we knew we needed to move forward with the book. We knew we were going to use peripheral resources, but one of the issues with the textbook that we currently have is we don't have enough. So this year we had to find textbooks to replace to get to a certain number, and this really kind of motivated us to really take a strong stance on looking at what could be accomplished. And when we looked at the books, very few books have really gotten to the point where you could say they are NGSS ready. This book by Pearson is very much so. It very much aligns with our curriculum. It very much sets up where we're going to be. It is a book that our chemistry teachers have started to implement certain aspects of it. They gave us certain resources to try out, and it works really well. Now, one of the big strong points of getting this textbook is also that we want to bring the level 1 and the level 2 on the same textbook. All right, this textbook can be used for both levels, and it has a very high rigor for the level 1, but it can also be used for level 2, and the goal is to bring up the rigor in the level 2 and get a much closer curriculum to that. So the subjects, the progression of the class, everything will be aligned. There may be some depth that would be different between the levels at this time, but this will allow us to really stay in tune. Right now, there are 2 different textbooks for the class. So even if students are willing to go up, and over the last 2 years, I've spent a lot of time trying to get the students up. This year alone, I was able to take 6, I volunteered to take the level 2 students in chemistry, and that's what I teach. And this year, at the beginning of the year, we were able to move 6 students up out of level 2 and level 1, and they're all seeing success. One is borderline with a C, but again, a C in that level 1 with that high rigor, we're very, very happy with it. And when we can have the same textbook and we can have the same materials, we believe we're going to be able to see more of this. Also, with the resources that we're going to be able to use, the small gaps that we have this year, meeting all the standards that we need to meet for the NGSS and the assessment, this is going to help us do that. It really is aligned to it. It really does fit with the new curriculum. And the resources that we've got will really be a huge benefit. As for cost, I was able to create a deal with the publisher where financially, at this time, it would be very beneficial for us to purchase the book. The cost for the textbook is lower than the suggested retail price. And I was also able to get them to give us 50 free textbooks. So on top of that, it's going to allow us to give us a little bubble with the textbooks, a little higher. I think our forecast was 318 students next year for chemistry. So even though we'll have a little bit extra, but that's kind of what we want. So if we get that bubble, we get the kids in there, that will have the books there. And we'll also have, now unfortunately, we all know kids lose books, but this will also give us a reserve so when the books are lost. To replace the books, our old chemistry textbooks, they're probably in excess of $40 to $50 to replace a book that is 2006. I had to replace like 15 of them this year, and I went to every source possible to kind of get them. But
Great. Terrific. Well, questions? It sounds like you've negotiated a very good deal.
I am very good at negotiating. That's probably one of my great strengths. All right.
What's the average life expectancy of a book like this with such rigor? Because I noticed the copyright is 2017-18, so it's
Right. With this
very
textbook,
recent.
we're getting the actual hardcover textbook. So it also comes with a 6-year online version. But when that expires, I want to make sure we had a textbook so we didn't have to rush in to buy a new one. So the life expectancy is this book. This book is far ahead of any book linked to the NGSS. All right, if you look at the books that we had from chemistry, a lot of the stuff stays the same and everything it is. It's just a way of teaching it and aligning things together. It's a stepwise fashion. So when the kids are coming up from the middle school and they're starting to learn these things, this book is going to be really well tied in. And I think that's going to add to its longevity. The publishers, they also agreed that we would be able to start using the online version this year and it wouldn't count as part of our 6-year subscription rate. So if we were to get the textbook this year, the chemistry teachers are very interested in implementing it this year. And we would be able to use the online service for all level 1 and level 2 students at no cost.
Thank you.
Well, so that kind of raises the question. Usually our process here is to receive it tonight, keep it on hold for 30 days, and then move on it at the next meeting. Would there be an advantage to waiving that process and just going ahead and approving this this evening?
It is my opinion, yes. That the quote that we have, it does go a little further, but the extension of the 6 months or the second semester online version will greatly help us. And especially with a very large portion of the people taking chemistry this year going to be taking the NGS assessment this year, it is also a great assistance for us to have.
Okay, is there any reason?
Be happy if you chose to approve it tonight.
All right, so there's money in the budget in the right line? Okay, everybody's nodding yes. Then, is that a motion that we waive our policy and approve the Pearson Chemistry book this evening?
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
any other questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your,
Thank you,
thank
yes,
you.
well
May I
done.
just- May I just say one thing? I'm sorry.
Hang on.
I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry. No,
I
no
just- I
worries.
just want to take the opportunity to kind of voice appreciation for the efforts of kind of bringing level 1 and level 2 kind of more in sync. And I'm not at all surprised that our teachers are working to lift the expectations and opportunities for all our students, but I'm just voicing my appreciation for that acknowledgement.
Thank you very much.
okay, thank you very much. All right, and then 10.2 is to approve a donation in the amount of $2,727 from the Guilford High School Fencing Booster Club to the fencing team, I assume, for the purchase of new equipment. So is there a motion to approve that donation?
What would, supposedly there was a exhibit that said what that equipment was, but I didn't see it.
I have that in front of me, Mr. Sands. You are looking at a standard fencing bag, some remote and power supply materials. You are looking at some body power cords, wired epées and blades. It's essentially the equipment that allows the electronic sensors to work appropriately, blades, body sensors, and then the power supplies that go along with that equipment. I'm looking at those items in numbers of 12 and 24 for the most case, for a total of $2,727.
Okay.
Okay. So is there a motion that we approve that donation?
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And then 10.3 is to receive for possible action the proposed nurses contract. I know, Ms. Sullivan, you were on the negotiating committee, and as usual, a very thorough job of negotiating this agreement. Who else was on the committee with you?
Mr. Sands, Mr. Baglio,
Okay.
Mr. Bowden, Ms. Trudeau.
Okay. And so can you just summarize what the proposal would be?
I can. So as we typically do for when we're doing contracts, we cleaned up the language, changed any outdated terminology. And then we had data and did a comparison of our nurses' salaries with others in the DERGs, looking specifically at our neighboring shoreline communities. And we settled on a $1 increase to the base salary in the first year only. And then it's a 3-year contract, and it's a 2% increase each of those 3 years. And I'd like to highlight that over the last couple of contracts, there's been significant work done to become more competitive with the other towns. And that sort of wraps up with this contract that we just negotiated. The nurses are still participating in the high deductible health plan as our other bargaining units. The board contributes to their HSA, 50%, and we made some minimal changes to the employee cost share. And that was it. And I
Okay.
would thank all those who participated in this effort.
All right, so that's a motion to ratify the
It is.
proposed contract. Is there a second?
Second?
Any other questions or comments? I know I want to thank really everybody who participated in this. I know that there was quite a bit of effort, quite a bit of time, but that's what it should be. You know, these are important decisions and important processes, and it's one of those aspects. You know, when we were interviewing board members or replacement board members, there's a lot that happens not in the library here and not on TV, and the negotiations with each of the bargaining units are one of those items, but truly worth it, because we are ultimately the representatives of the community. So the motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Committee reports, Policy Committee.
Policy Committee has not met in the last month. We meet next end of February, I think.
Okay. And Operations Committee?
Well, we met earlier tonight. One of the things we reviewed was the progress on the bus performance. And we're continuing to make progress, but it's becoming clear that some of the initial goals are going to be pretty tough to meet. We also reviewed the upcoming work on facilities. There's going to be, as there is most summers, quite significant work this summer done to the schools, and we're about to put most of that work out for bid. And lastly, we reviewed some of the energy performance contract implementation, and one of the things that we were pleased to hear was that all of the solar installations are now online and producing electricity with significant reductions in outside electric purchases. So this has actually been a success for us, and that would be the summary of it.
Okay. Curriculum, instruction, and assessment?
We haven't met, we meet,
This month.
yeah, January.
Next month, okay, or this month?
This
This
month.
month, later this
Okay.
month.
All right, any town committee, town liaison reports? It was pretty slow in December, obviously.
Yeah, right.
How about the Learn Board of Directors? Was there a meeting in December?
There was, I don't know about December,
Oh, would
but
you?
I attended last Thursday.
Well, okay, then what happened that you would like to tell us about?
First of all, it was held in New London, where there's the Ocean Avenue Learn Academy, which is a facility that they're in the midst of getting up and running. It's up and running enough now to hold meetings there, and we had a tour after the business meeting. In the business meeting, we went through the budget and grant applications and various other business-related items. So,
Okay.
Most exciting portion of that Ocean Avenue facility for us would be a diagnostic center that they have for some of the youngest children, and so it is a much more local opportunity for us if we need support for some of our youngest students to both have their folks come out and support our staff in diagnostics here in district, or they offer a 45-day diagnostic placement as well, and it is a more local and better opportunity than we've had when such needs have arisen in the past. So we're excited about that opportunity in that new facility.
Great. Okay. All right, I guess that's all for committee reports. Public questions, item 12, or comments or thoughts? Please, come on up.
And my name's Polly Reeder, live on Moose Hill Road. Actually, I have largely two questions, which are, so two different things I'd like to talk about and ask about. Previously, when I was working professionally, about 20 years in education and higher education, and then the last 10 years very intimately with the boards of the higher ed institutions, with the board chairs, with the presidents. And as is very typical, and obviously this is public school versus a private higher ed setting, usually board members would have some metrics that they're measuring against, that they're tracking. And typically that would be not just who's coming into the organization or the school, but who's leaving the school. And I understand that this data might be somewhat difficult to obtain. But I think that there's, just myself anecdotally, I know of, just this fall, 4 different students that feel that they've been forced by the management and how things have gone at Cox Elementary School to leave Cox. 2 of them to leave the district, 2 of them to leave Cox. They're no longer comfortable, can't learn in that environment. And then I think many of us know about the suicide attempt rate. With all due respect, Dr. Freeman, that just as Guilford, and there's so many great and wonderful things that do happen here in the schools, that just as Guilford has many of these measures of high quality, we also are right up there at the top of the state, right in the top few, in terms of our rate of hospitalization of suicide attempts. And that's been put out in peer-reviewed research. So I'm assuming that as I've been following things with the board meetings, I assume that perhaps it's not new information.
We've read that
Right.
article, and there are some things, I gotta leave it to the researchers to maybe comment a little more.
No, we've read the article, and
Yeah,
this is certainly
yeah, I'm
not the
sure.
forum for that. I have some questions just about, on balance, the accuracy of the numbers over time, given the location of hospitals across the state and exactly what they're measuring. So I think we all take extremely seriously
Right.
student mental health, anxiety, depression, suicidality. My own personal opinion is that I wouldn't characterize, based on that one study, that Guilford is more at risk than any other town in the state. I think that's a questionable finding of the study, personally.
Although it's peer-reviewed, published research.
Yes,
So
many things,
is there
yeah.
anything else
Well,
that, any
I
other
can-
data that would actually
Yeah,
back
I can-
that up, that's not accurate?
Well, they have one Durg A district that managed to have 0 reported hospitalizations for any kind of suicidal behavior over 3 years. Unlikely.
Yeah.
And so, and part of, I think we did talk about this quite a bit last year,
We had an
last year.
entire board meeting that was committed
Yeah.
to this topic.
We are very fortunate to be in a close geographic proximity to Yale Psychiatric Institute, one of the, if not the best in the state, certainly one of the best in the state. And so whereas some districts in places that don't have that kind of facility might pursue a different type of hospitalization, or even no hospitalization at all, say a town in the northwest corner, a school official or a pediatrician might go in one route. In places that have proximity to YPI, why not? Of course you're going to take advantage to YPI. We're aware of this study, and we did have actually a full board meeting on it, just on that study. But I think
A workshop meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we are, I think Dr. Freeman's report this evening about the Sandy Hook Promise app, that's one of the things that grew out of that, frankly.
It's an important step.
It is.
It's wonderful.
And we're, that was a collaboration between the board, the community, and the administration. So we are quite aware that we live in a stressful time, in a stressful nation, and there are lots of things contributing to anxiety generally. Social media maybe being at the top of the list, frankly, or at least on the list in some important place. We are working very hard along with parents and faculty and administrators to try to do what we can to make the experience more positive.
And I would just like to add that we take our responsibility to our students and their health and well-being in this school district and at every single school, including Cox Elementary School, as our single most important mission. Everything that we do is in service of healthy, well, and happy students. And I just want to be clear that there is no single environment in this setting where students are actively driven out of our schools. And I want to be clear that I cannot talk about individual cases here in a public setting.
I can talk about my case. I'd be happy to.
Can I make a suggestion? It might be a better place to have that conversation with Dr. Freeman in his office.
We've been trying to, or we have started that.
Okay.
Oh, I'm happy to have a meeting with you
Yes.
at any time.
And my husband contacted you about the ongoing issues at Cox, and we're only one of many who are experiencing
I would
them.
urge you to talk to the superintendent. Rather,
Yeah.
there is a very clear set of expectations that we have. And we have a very well-defined set of policies relating to this. And I would suggest to you that if you haven't met with Dr. Freeman yet, that might be the place to start.
But as I, came into the district and had the experiences through, my children initially, and who used to love school, having a very different feeling. And of course, it is a large transition and whatnot, but a lot of it is the climate. And of course, each of the 4 elementaries, I'm sure, are different. And I think, it's widely known in the community that Lakes is a more inclusive or more comfortable climate.
I would
so-
take issue with that
Yeah, I'm-
characterization.
Well,
Or,
can I-
it's
on it-
safe, and so, at any rate, I'll change. So, so I've really been, every opportunity I get, trying to talk to parents and whatnot, and to, just get what their experience is, and it was a long time before I ever started saying truly what my children's experience had been, or what I was, picking up, in terms of data and evidence, my own eyes or whatnot. So I don't, it is not only Cox, there definitely, I think, is a climate of conformity and over-control of student behavior in order to keep, the time crunch and keep students in line, no one act out, lessen disciplinary issues, lessen possibility for liability, and it just, it adds to an incredible degree of pressure. And the last thing to switch topics then, to say on that is many people, I think, many other parents have said what has been our own experience. We moved to Guilford, not just because of the shoreline, but specifically for the schools. There are a lot of wonderful things happening in the schools, a lot of, really outstanding teachers and education. But the schools don't feel like the town. It doesn't feel like the two go together. The schools are much more authoritarian, not egalitarian with how some teachers talk sometimes to the students, some of them many. And it's much more controlling and not a comfortable environment. Or not, so I'm certainly not the only person who feels like the schools don't really match the town.
I guess you're the first person I've ever heard say that. So I guess I'd urge that if there are other people that feel that way, that they should get a hold of Dr. Freeman, get a hold of the building principal. And that is not really something that I've heard any concerns about, but maybe I haven't heard. So I'd urge, if there are people that feel that way, that believe that, and you recognize there's a little bit of tension in that. It is a school, and there are rules, and there are things that we have to expect kids are going to do, and if they don't do them, that we're going to look for
people make mistakes. It's a learning environment,
right? Yeah. And especially when we're talking about atmosphere issues, we kind of can't have free range, kids. It's not a good idea educationally, it's not a good idea culturally, but I just urge you to meet with Dr. Freeman, first of all, but second of all, if there are other people that have these kinds of concerns, get a hold of your building principal, talk to your teacher, and after that, talk to Dr. Freeman.
Please.
That's fine.
And the second item I wanted to ask about, and you did, Dr. Freeman, obviously go into it somewhat in the presentation, is that in the earlier months there had been mention, or when folks had asked or mentioned about recess, it was said, well, the district leadership team is looking at that. And you presented, some information. And so I wonder just sort of to ask specifically, where does that sit? Where do you think that's going to go?
At this time, my budget doesn't plan for an expansion of recess. As I noted in my presentation, we have essentially the same specified recess time as other similarly situated communities. Our teachers know that they give breaks. I was in a classroom today where students were coming in from recess and spent time collecting themselves and recentering themselves before going into the academic work. Teachers know that they have the ability to take their classrooms out for a walk if that's what they need. And we have other movement that is incorporated into instruction in the regular classrooms, in the music classrooms, in the PE classrooms. But my budget does not provide for an expansion of recess time.
Well, and it
set
might not
apart.
cost anything to do.
Well, but as I noted, we've got one of the shortest school days, and so while it might not have a financial impact, it will have an impact on the rest of the school day. As I noted earlier, when the state tried to budget out how much contact time was recommended
Right.
for literacy, numeracy,
Right.
science, social studies, free play, PE, art, music, dance, it didn't all fit in. And
Right.
so while it may not have a financial impact, it would have an impact on the rest of the day. And so at this time, we are planning on the same structured recess that we have this year, and teachers know that they have opportunities to build other movement and other opportunities into the day for their students.
Well, and, I mean, on the last point, in terms of teachers knowing that they do, you know, and I know I've heard friends have kids at LEAT, you know, I've heard that LEAT does, on a pretty regular basis, like pretty much weekly, get an extra recess or whatnot. And, you know, we've heard time and again, and the principal at Cox has said, you know, they're able to do this, but it's known very well, you know, I'm sure from teachers to their supervisor to principal of where they're really supposed to be and what they're supposed to be time on task. And so we really, you know, you could poll everybody at Cox and see when was the last time that there was an additional recess.
I work
that-
very closely with
Yeah.
the teachers at Cox, and again, I would have to say that I have a different impression of the teachers' understanding of the latitude that they have to meet their
Okay.
students' needs. I was in Cox today visiting classrooms and came away with a very different impression of the teachers' ability to meet their students' needs.
Yeah, it's just in terms of the administrative leadership and, you know, what is allowed for. And I totally realize that within the 6 and whatnot hours of the day, the confined time frame, but I think the research is actually pretty clear, and as more and more of it comes out, there are more districts across the country, entire states that are changing the law, their guideline requiring schools to have much more recess than we have. Because, and in other countries, you know, the students can actually focus better. It actually improves academics to have time to have free play outside in whatever way, let alone the whole, you know, physical benefits of it. But it would move incredibly towards promoting student agency, student resilience, social and emotional well-being. That's the cheapest thing that the Board of Ed could do to help our students, is to increase recess time. And guess what? It would probably improve our test scores, which we all know seems to really be what's quite important to some people. It seems like it's a no-brainer, honestly, just based on the research and where things are going across the country.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yes.
About that?
Yes.
Because Dr. Freeman was talking about the length of the school day, and we're 6 hours, 25 minutes.
Yep.
And that's kind of short. Would you support a longer elementary school day?
Not with this climate at the elementary schools here. But if that's what it took, if that's what it took, I probably would, because in the end, it would be like my children with everybody else's children having more time to interact with them. And that's honestly, you know, not just how people learn interaction with other people, but that's how the brain develops. So, I mean, yes, I would. I would prefer it not to be. I'd prefer time to just be taken away from whatever else. I mean, at Cox, we had, you know, 25 minutes taken out of it cumulatively across the week out of both lunch and recess. And there's no, you know, it's been asked and there's no answers to what that time went toward. It just went into the kind of the pool of
I think they're probably
minutes
in
for
music.
science or,
I believe that Cox had longer recess
Right.
periods than any of the other three
We had
elementary
30 and
schools as
30.
we aligned the schedules, and that time went into literacy, numeracy instruction in the classroom. It went into mindfulness that's taking place in the classrooms. It went into everything that happens in the classroom teacher's environment: science, social studies, literacy, numeracy.
I mean, the problem is everything that we've talked about, art, music, literacy, numeracy, recess, everything else. Research shows all of that's good.
Yes,
There's no bad idea in any of this.
we would need a 9-hour school day, however, to do all of it, yes.
And this is, again, it's a function of having a very large geographic town with scattered elementary schools and buses that serve multiple waves. If we had one central elementary school and you didn't have 4 waves, then you could have a longer elementary school day starting earlier. I'd be very surprised if parents
Right.
wanted their kids getting home or
Later.
leaving school at
Right.
4 o'clock and getting home at 4:45. And my guess is the support for that would be about, 2%. And so there's not,
that
right,
much.
maybe not that much.
Zero.
So, time's not going
Right.
to get added to the end of the school day. It's not.
right, so I would advise taking it out of,
Instruction.
yes.
Okay,
Yes,
well.
and just to clarify, and I do think this is an important point of clarification, because, we're looking at the minutes and how we compare to the different DIRGs and whatnot. And of course, who knows how other schools and other districts are implementing it, but how those 25 minutes happen at Cox, and finally this year, there have been some improvements, because we've had so many issues with recess aides and, kids couldn't play tag. It was a flat-out school rule for well over a year, and recess aides saying things that were not healthy to the children, and et cetera. So things have improved, thankfully. They're not without bumps frequently, putting it light, but the 25 minutes happens such that at the start of the 25 minutes is when the students are, getting up from their lunch tables and lining up to go out to recess. So of course, that can take really quick, or it can take longer.
Can I make a
It depends.
suggestion?
Yeah,
We're getting really granular here,
Right.
and this is
Okay,
not a.
and I usually don't want to do
I-
that, but if you're talking about,
Can I,
it's
can I just finish what I was saying?
Yes,
If
sir.
It would, when you're getting into things like this level of implementation, that's not a Board of Education issue. It is an administrative issue. And I urge you again to meet with Dr. Freeman if there is an issue relating to the implementation of a board policy at one of the elementary schools. That's who to take it up with. But we're not going to get involved in who's lining up for recess. That's not
That's
we're gonna-
I'm saying. What I'm saying is the board is looking at, the schools have 25 minutes of recess, and they don't. It's 25 minutes, start at time 0 to line up. That includes going out, and then at 20 minutes is when they call the kids back into line. And the state regs are for 20. So I'm just.
Well, okay.
That's
That's an
right, exactly. And
implementation
so
issue.
that's why I didn't
Thank you.
go there
So-
to start with. It's a fine point, but it is an important point where, it's not like we're on average with everybody else.
And
And
I'm-
who knows
and I'm
how
happy
other
to discuss
districts
it.
are implementing it.
Thank you.
I can only urge you to speak to Dr. Freeman on this kind of an implementation issue. We have our policies, the policies are what they are. I doubt that we're going to add recess time this year. I mean, I'm only speaking for myself, but I don't see how it's going to happen when we're getting so many other demands, like for, say, art instruction or something like that. It's not a bad idea. And if we had a 6-hour and 50-minute school day, although I see there's some schools who have a 6-hour and 50-minute school day that only have 20 minutes recess, so I don't know.
Yeah, it could be worse.
well,
Yeah. a
Please
lot of
call
things
me
could be
tomorrow.
worse.
I'm happy to sit and talk.
Thank you.
All
Yeah.
right.
So, but again, I do appreciate very much, because you guys have a tremendous service role. You're not getting paid for this. We still feel, Guilford, schools are still, much better than many. I just, after so many experiences and talking to other parents and whatnot, I do commend very much that you've turned the priorities to focus on climate and focus on students' well-being. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Other public questions? Please, come on up.
Good evening, Kathy Catherine Adams, 250 Drumar Road. I'm here, I just want to respond to the information that came beforehand, which was the Say Something. And I have a couple questions that I hope we think about as it's rolling out, because I think they're pretty important, but there might be others, and maybe we could minimize some of these, and I might repeat myself, so bear with me. It was interesting to think about how you introduced it, Dr. Freeman, with "don't be a bystander." And the last meeting I attended, I heard you say self-advocacy. And these two things are extremely important. And I do hope the use of Say Something scaffolds those skills and allows our children to embrace them and actually grow into them and own those skills. So I'm really excited about that idea. My concerns are, because that's what we bring up, is our concerns. Weight of responsibility.
Is what, I'm sorry?
The weight of the responsibility of using Say Something. So
Okay.
now you're responsible to say something. Don't be a bystander. When we say don't be a bystander, some kids are hearing, am I not doing enough? Am I the one who has to report this? Didn't someone else report this? There's actually a phenomenon of bystander fatigue. So we have to think about making sure our children aren't feeling weighted down by the responsibility, and they feel strengthened by the product that we're bringing in to them as a technology. So it's important for us to understand the product and its role. So thinking about that stress that it could produce. Potential for distraction would be the secondary one. If they feel like they're in a test and someone's cheating, is that going to be a time that someone's going to say, oh, I should report this? It could happen, right? So these things are going to happen. That's probably going to happen in that beginning as we find out whether that's life-threatening or not and how kids are using it. So the statistic of how it's used in our community will be very interesting to discover. Assuming it's going to help us with the really important life-threatening issues that none of us want to have occur, obviously. And I'm not trying to make light of that at all. But there is a potential for distraction for some children and some learning types and in some environments. 4 minutes to complete of reporting is what we heard this evening. So 4 minutes to start the report, to respond to the questions, and to be given, I believe, a number, so if you needed to come back to your report. So 4 to 5 minutes. Do kids have that time in their day? How do they make use of the time in the day? Which brought up a question that the woman could not answer, which is, when are these reports being made? Are they being made during the school day? Are they being made during a typical lunchtime? Are they being made in the evening? Are they being made at 3 in the morning? If these are being made at 3 in the morning because it's something that's weighing on their shoulders, that's something we have to look at. So how the app is being used. And I think that's something we need to track, make sure that we get that information so that we can make sure that we're serving our student population. The rollout of Say Something does not require a smartphone. I heard tonight app. When this goes out at the middle school, not all those kids have smartphones. That's another pressure of, I don't have a smartphone, I can't use this. You've actually maybe scared some kids thinking they don't know how to use it or they can't use it. They might not have a smartphone at home. Can they use their Chromebooks? We need to make sure that's clear to the students from the get-go. Say Something actually is you going to a person first. Now, if that doesn't work for you, or you're afraid, or that would, for whatever reason, what else can you do? I can make a phone call. I have a landline at home, right, at least. So that can be one way of using it. The Chromebook potentially has a place for the app, I think. I don't know that for sure, but they might have a home computer. They can do that as well. Third, tertiary, I would believe, would be the smartphone, because we do not need to present this as a land of entitlement where the smartphone is the only way to use Say Something. So to me, really need to think about how we structure the rollout of the support. Training period. They address their training period. And then in tandem, just how are they using it in school? Making sure that we don't put all of our incredible support services that we have in the school to the sidelines as bystanders. Making sure that those are the first. And these other things are secondary and equal and strong. But we need to make sure that they come together so that kids feel that all of these are available to them.
Well, let me just say 2 things on that. I don't think that's the intention, is to make.
I know it's not the intention.
And nor do I think it's the reality. I mean, we had workshop again on this issue. And Guilford is not the first town to do this.
I know
And the
that.
experience has been very positive in
Yes.
similar towns. The people that have developed this and are doing the training and are doing the implementation are have been historically very professional. We have no reason to think that they're not going to be professional in Guilford.
We have always emphasized that the most important element in our safety and wellness plans is the human element. And we have always said to our students that if you are worried for yourself or anyone else, to go to a trusted adult. That remains the message, and that remains the first course of action. And when Sandy Hook speaks to our students, that's where they begin. That if you're worried about somebody, you talk to a trusted adult. This becomes one other vehicle for a student who, for any reason, feels that he or she can't or isn't ready to speak to an adult. And then you're absolutely right, you can access it through a website, so any electronic device that connects you to the internet can get you to the Say Something website. You can access it through a landline, or you can access it through, but we have no intention of privileging the cell phone or saying that this takes the place of our human networks or systems. We want to be a community that is built on relationships. This is just one more vehicle, because if even one student doesn't feel comfortable coming forward, we want to give them every route possible to get that help. And so it's an addition. It is in no way intended to replace any of the important things that you just spoke about.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make that clear for anybody who's
Thank you for confirming
listening.
that, and I'm sorry it sounded to you as if I was saying otherwise. My concern is when the students hear it as an app, because people say Smart Something app. We're not hearing the Say Something program, which includes da, 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 da.
Yeah, I
So
think
how we scaffold this is how they hear it.
Well, and again, we're not the first town that's done this, and I think
I
the
understand that.
experience is in these other towns that there are kids that feel better doing it this way.
I don't
and
doubt that
that's-
for a second. I'm not undermining the use, I'm not undermining the product. I think it's fabulous. That's not what I'm saying. There's
Well-
no negative content here. It's all about how we introduce the product so they understand the use of the product.
And I think that,
I think Dr. Freeman.
Yeah, and so
And
we're
cover that.
excited that we've got the Sandy Hook, team who is coming in to do that presentation, so that they are people who are as familiar with it as possible, and that we can't accidentally somehow miss that message. We will then we will continue to make sure that we focus on that. I mean, again, we are schools that are built on relationships. I don't intend to be schools that are built on technologies. We will remain built on relationships, and thank you for the caution.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else? Others? Okay, then we do have a brief executive session. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we will be coming back into public session only for the purposes of adjournment, and we will not be making any further public votes this evening. Thank you very much.